Let's have another round of gratitude for Mike Stagnita getting this ready. I have the blessing of introducing my friend, Kim Humphrey, this morning. I met Kim 6 years ago from a mutual friend of ours, Jim Kreitler, if you ever happen to hop on here. Our connection was, Jim was the CEO of Calvary Addiction Recovery Center at the time, and the Race for Recovery was giving all of the funds for the Race for Recovery for the first 2 years to sponsor people. From the race, we would sponsor people to scholarships through Calvary. And when Jim was going into retirement, he turned me on to Kim. Kim is a retired Phoenix police commander, first of all. Thank you for your service. And when Kim did that, Kim doesn't slow down. He's actually he's an Ironman, and I mean that. I'm a half Ironman, he's an Ironman. And that's a true story. But Kim, he doesn't slow down, and he has a powerful story, which I don't know what he's sharing today about that, but he has a powerful story, him and his wife, that was featured in the cover of Time magazine. Powerful story. Kim went on after his retirement to be the CEO and the executive director of PAL, Parents of Addicted Loved Ones, where all of the money for the Race for Recovery go. They are international now. He has built it up. He has a passion with his wife, Michelle, to drive recovery and enable the resources to those who can't get them, who want them, and offer recovery to families, the unit, so it can really impact everybody and not just focus on the addict. It focuses on the whole family unit to give a much better chance of success through the addiction. So I was blessed to meet Kim that way. He also is a Race for Recovery Alcatraz escapee with me. In fact, he would escape before I did. He had to wait for me, but he waited for me. So I thank you for that. And the wing woman got the greatest pictures ever. Kim did that race with me. It was the first time I swam from Alcatraz with shackles on my legs. And the very people who used to arrest me, we did it to show that you could break the chains of addiction. And Kim took those cuffs off of my ankles when I came out of the water. Of course, he waited for me. And then when we finished the 7-mile run to the Golden Gate Bridge and back, Kim took them off of my wrist. So very special bond. It was like, kind of like, Batman being Kim, and I was more like the criminal in the story for what we did. So it is a joy. It is an honor for me to introduce to you for today's message, Finding Joy, Kim Humphreys.
Those were the days, right? I remember when Mike called me and he said, I'm going to do this escape from Alcatraz thing. He goes, there's one issue though. He goes, they're going to let me do it with shackles, but I need somebody there to carry the key, just in case. And I'm thinking, just in case what? And the next thing you know, we're talking about this, and I'm not only carrying one key, I'm carrying two, because I'm thinking, what might happen out there? And so we get over there, and I get there a day early so we can go see what it's like. I've never swam in, that particular area of the bay, and obviously it's very cold and has a reputation. And I'm thinking, how bad could it be? I've done a lot of swimming before, and all of that, but then my wife and I were there a day early, so we went on this little tour, and we said, well, we can put in, this extra day. So we're out on this little tour, and this person's showing us something, and as we're going past the bay, this tour guide says, oh yeah, and just the other day, we had a shark attack right over here. And he's pointing in this area, and no less than, no joke, no less than that, we get out, we go to lunch. And we're sitting down and we're having lunch at this nice restaurant overlooking the bay. And the waiter comes out and says, hey, get your meal and everything. And he goes, just making conversation. Are you guys in town for anything in particular? And I said, yeah, we're in town for this escape from Alcatraz race. And he goes, you mean those lunatics that swim from the... And I'm like, well, yeah. I go, why? He goes, you do know that they just had a shark attack right out here. And I'm thinking, what did I sign up for? What am I doing? And needless to say, it was an amazing experience, and honestly, it was something I will never forget. So thank you, Mike. And it was a great introduction for us to get to know each other. But as you said, in 2014, I retired from the Phoenix Police Department, so 11 years now after 32 years. And that's not really what I want to talk about today. I just want to share with you a few things about our experience, our journey. But as I go back and think about this, and I was trying to remember how exactly I ended up in this place, I just remember one day I was laying in bed, and I remember my wife tapping me and saying, I need you to get up. And I remember shaking my head, and she said, I really need you to get up. And I kept thinking to myself, I don't want to get up. And she said, you got to eat. You got to have something to drink. And I just remember thinking, I don't want to get anything to drink. I don't want to get anything to eat. Would you please leave me alone so I can go back to sleep? And she insisted. Why? Because this was the 6th day in a row that I didn't get out of bed. 23 hours a day I was in bed. Now, I was working for the Phoenix Police Department. Did I call them and tell them I was sick? No. I couldn't do that. As a matter of fact, I didn't talk to anybody. She was calling them and trying to explain why I wasn't coming to work. And I just remember sitting there and thinking, can people just leave me alone? Because if I go to sleep, maybe all these thoughts that are going through my head will go away. And maybe I can deal with what's going on in my life if I wake up and all of a sudden it's all better. So I kept wanting to go back to sleep. And finally she rousted me out of bed and said, we're going to the doctor. And I thought, I don't want to go. And she insisted, and I just followed her along. I never said a word. She drove me to our doctor, who's known me for 25 years. Sat down in there, doctor walks in, looks at me, and she says, what's going on? And I didn't answer her. And she tries to talk to me, and I just looked at her, and I'm thinking, can I go home yet? Because I want to go back to bed. And she just kept trying to talk to me, and finally she looked at Michelle and says, can I talk to you outside? And they left the room, and apparently they had a conversation. She walked back in, and she says, okay, here's the deal. You need to get some help. If you don't eat, if you don't drink, you have to go to the hospital. You're dehydrated. You've lost 12 pounds in a week. You need nourishment. And I'm just like, can I go yet? And she says, so that's what we're going to do. And if you don't, I'm going to have you go to the hospital. And I'm like, whatever. Just can I go? And so she leaves. And my wife gets me in the car. And she says, we're going to see somebody, my counselor. Because she was seeing a counselor over the fact that we had this issue going on with our sons. And so we drive across town, we sit down, and now I'm looking at somebody else who wants to talk to me that I don't want to talk to. And I'm just like, could somebody just let me go home and go back to bed? And she just looks at me and she says, I need you to understand something. You've had a very serious mental episode here. And she says, and we need to get you back on track. But the most important thing you need to understand right now is you don't need to worry about anything. Me and Michelle, we're going to worry about your sons. We're going to take care of things. You need to take care of yourself. You don't need to be the knight in shining armor. At this point, I'm starting to lose it. Because that's why I was there. Because for the last 10 years, I was trying to fix my sons, plural. The 2 sons that we had. Because starting at age 15, we found out that our older son was going down this road. It was a phone call from a concerned parent who said that her daughter was friends with our son. And she said, we're very concerned, and I know you don't really know me very well, but my daughter and her friends are convinced that your son is going to overdose. Okay. First of all, my wife is like, you called the wrong house. We don't have a problem. Our sons don't have a problem. And I'm serious, we don't. There's no problem at school. We don't have any issues with them. We have this really nice, scenario going on here at home. Everything's good. And we go from that to they think he's going to overdose. Well, after the denial is done and she hangs up the phone and we're sitting there thinking about it, and I call my son in, and at least my police training kicked in at that point, and I said, Sean, come in here. I need to talk to you about this. Somebody just called, and this is what they said. And he said, well, that's crazy. And I said, okay, well then, I guess you wouldn't mind if we just do a drug test. Why, you don't trust me? Well, there was my answer, right? But I did go to CVS, and I did get a drug test, and we gave it to him, and he tested positive for opioids. We go from 0 opioids. We go from no problem to, I think he's going to overdose. And needless to say, I could share with you for the next, several hours where it spiraled. But I will tell you that it didn't get better, in spite of everything we tried. And trust me, if you can think of something to try, we tried it. He didn't want to go anywhere, but we took him. We tried anything and everything we could, and it got worse. It got worse, it got worse, it got worse. And his younger brother, who's 4 years younger, he sees all this stuff, and he's like, oh, he would never do any of that stuff. Well, I'm going to just flash forward a little ways, and he goes off to college, the younger brother. He's in there for 2 years, mechanical engineering, doing fantastic. One day, he comes home and he says he dropped out of school. Why would you drop out of school? Long story. He's doing the same thing his brother is. Guess who are on the list for the worst parents on the planet award? That's how we feel. We feel we have failed as parents. In spite of the fact that we raised them in a loving environment, in spite of the fact that there's no chaos in our home, and trust me, there's plenty of people that come from chaos. Well, that wasn't the problem. And in this particular case, I don't know what happened. I thought we followed the recipe. I thought you just do this, this, and this, and everything just works out. Isn't that how it's supposed to happen? My wife gave up her career and said, stayed home with our kids. That's what we did. And now we have 2 sons that are out there and we don't even know what they're doing. And this is what's going on. And this is how we feel. And so, of course, we go to our good friends who happen to be friends from church. And we're sharing it with them. And these are people that we see all the time. And we're telling them this story. And you know what? It was really strange because the first thing they said was, what do you think you did wrong? Well, I'll tell you what, I guess everything. I guess everything. I don't know. And the longer we were hanging out with them, the worse it got. And after a few weeks of going out and talking to them, I think they were just getting sick of it. I don't think they wanted to hear it. They had 2 sons just like us, same age. And so we were at a restaurant. Her husband gets up to go to the restroom. We're sitting there, we're talking to her for a couple of minutes, and he was a little bit better about talking to us, but she was not. And as soon as he got up, she says, "Just so you know, this would have never happened in our house. Because if Larry would have found out about this is what he would have done. He'd, stop that right now." You don't think I tried to stop it? You don't think that I tried to keep this kind of thing from happening? The reality is that's what the world looked at and saw in us. And sadly, that world included the people from our church who are many times just don't understand. They don't understand this issue. And so as time went on, I just started to realize that we were not in control. And the harder it got, the more difficult things got, the more it started to weigh on me. And that's why I ended up where I was. Because one day, not only had they gone down the road of all this, and they had started to have issues with being in the hospital left and right, getting arrested, all these other things that started to happen. But eventually, when it was really bad, and they were living on the streets. I don't mean living in people's houses. I mean literally, I'm getting phone calls from the police department. They're in the bushes, living in a little makeshift, shack under bushes in a park. And I'm getting these calls from people I know. And they're telling me that this is what's happening. And we don't know where they are. And then the only reason we knew what was happening occasionally was because they were on our insurance. And if they went into the hospital or something else, it would show up. And then we found out they were overdosing. We didn't even know how many times. We didn't even know, sometimes we didn't even realize that they might not have lived. We didn't understand what was really happening because we couldn't find them sometimes for months at a time. And so this started to weigh on me. And it started to get to the point where my story began. Because one day I got a phone call from one of my friends, and he explained to me that he had my sons in custody. And it was a fellow commander. And he said, "Kim, I'm really sorry, but they're in a lot of trouble this time. These are serious crimes. And the reality is I don't technically have to put them in jail tonight." He goes, "I can release them tonight. What do you want me to do?" I look at my wife and I said to my friend, "Listen, I want you to do whatever you think it's going to take to save their lives." He said, "Kim, they need to go to jail." And I said, "Okay." And off they went. And off they went. And here's what happened to me. I could not deal with that. I could not deal with that. And that's how I found myself where I was at. That's how I found myself not being able to get up. That's when I realized that all this time, all these years of me living my life the way I've been living it and thinking that I'm in control of all these outcomes in my life. I'm in control of what happens to my children. I'm in control of my entire life. Now, I wouldn't have said that out loud, but I thought it. Because I was doing all the right things, right? I was following all the rules and doing the thing you're supposed to do. But that's not how life works. And sadly, through all of this, maybe that's what needed to happen. And I wanted to focus in on just a couple of verses today, probably very familiar to most of you. We think you ought to know, dear brothers and sisters, about the trouble we went through in the province of Asia. We were crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. In fact, we expected to die. I like the New Living Translation on this one because I think it makes it really clear what these words mean. If you look back at the original word where it says crushed, that's not like, just pushing down. That's pressing. Pressing is the other word there. That's the overwhelmed thing. You know what crushed is? Crushed is a word that takes it all the way to the point of hopelessness. That's how bad crushed is. Crushed is you're hopeless. And when you get to that point, you expect to die because you don't see any way out. And my question was always, why? I read this and I'm thinking, Paul wrote this. Paul the apostle, Paul the guy that is out there sharing the gospel. He's going all over the place doing exactly what God wants him to do. He is a person that is absolutely dedicated his life to reaching other people, and yet he is sitting there saying that he thinks we're going to die. And I kept saying, why? But the answer is in the rest of the verse, right? And the rest of it. Because if you look at it and you say, well, why did this happen? Well, the rest of it is, but as a result, we stopped relying on ourselves and learned to rely only on God. Why? Because they expected to die, but he overcame death.
Amen.
He can raise the dead. He can handle all the problems. He can handle up to and including the problem of we lose our life. And as I read this and I remember this and I think about this, and thank goodness I grew up knowing things like this. But then bringing it back and reading it and looking at it and realizing really what it meant was what mattered. And as I started to go through this and realize all of this, I came to the conclusion that through all of this, what is it that I needed to learn? I ask this question now when things go wrong, when things aren't going well. I may seem strange, but I actually sit down and we talk and we go, wow, didn't expect that to happen. What do you think we're going to learn out of this? And we sit back and sometimes we're shocked. Sometimes we never figure it out. But sometimes it becomes real obvious. And in this case, it's going to become real obvious. Because I thought about it, and as I was looking at this, let me share just a couple of things. As a police officer, okay, I'm being honest with you, okay? So as a police officer, I go back in time, and I will tell you that when I saw people standing on a corner, here's what I thought. Needs to be in jail. Needs to go away. Made really stupid choices. Really, really am annoyed by the fact that they're allowed to be running around out there. Yes, that's how I thought. Do you think maybe that judgment, maybe something was in there that needed to change in my life? Do you think maybe God was saying, wow, you got something to learn here. I've got this ideal life. I thought everything was in control. Maybe I've got something to learn here. These other people that are saying these things about how they have got it all figured out, maybe I've got something to learn here. Maybe I've got something I can share. You know that verse in the Bible that says, you know what? God will never give you anything you can't handle. That's people's favorite verse. Right? Sometimes it's like, he'll never give you anything that you can't handle. There's only one problem with that verse. It's not in the Bible. It doesn't exist. The verse is about temptation. It is not about what you can handle. The truth is God's going to give you lots of things you can't handle. Comma. Without him. Lots of things that you can't do. Lots of things that will put you in a place where I was at. And the reality is that's what it is. Because when it comes down to it, this concept of faith, I grew up since I was 4 years old, knowing and believing that Jesus was my personal Savior. And I am thankful that my family brought me up thinking that. But here's the thing. I ask people all the time, do you have faith? Oh yeah, definitely. Here's a better question for you. How do you know? And I don't mean because you say, oh, because I believe in Jesus. Well, maybe you do. That's fantastic. But how do you know you have faith? How do you know? I'll tell you when you're going to know. Do you know when you're going to know? When that's all you got. When that's the only thing you can hang on to. Because if you start thinking about it and you start realizing, what's going on in your life, when it's all you have left, that's when you're going to know you have faith. Because otherwise, you're going to rely on you. You're going to rely on what you think you can do. Because you're going to think that I can figure this out, that I can do it. But faith and fear cannot coexist. If I'm living in that fear that this is not going to work out, that this is all going to end in a certain way, that I'm convinced that it's going to end, then I have gone down the road of not believing that God's in control. Amen. And I don't mean that God's going to always fix it the way I want it fixed. But He's always going to work it out for good. He's always going to do something with it that is for His purposes. He is not sitting up there going, oh, gee, never thought that would happen. He knows what's going to happen. He knows what we need. He knows what needs to happen in our lives for us to grow and become the people He wants us to be. And it was during all that we found this organization called PAL, Parents of Addicted Loved Ones. And I'm not really going to talk much about PAL today. I just want to tell you that when my wife finally found that and we showed up at a meeting, it was the first time we realized we were around other people who understood what we were going through. We were not alone. They had been down these paths before. They were willing to share their lives with us. They were willing to walk with us and help us through this. And it wasn't until we found those individuals that we finally started to see that there was someplace else that we could go. So where did our journey go as I kind of wrap things up today? Well, you already know, because of where I started, where I ended up. And it was not a pretty place. And it was really hard. And so let me just share something with you real quick here. My wife kept a journal, and I'm very thankful that she did. And I brought it with me. She let me. So here's the thing. Let me just read this to you. She entered this while we were in the throes of all this, and it was when it was really bad. And she says, before we drew the boundary, he was calling me early Sunday morning after having been up all night, wanting to attend church with us. We did that 2 Sundays in a row before realizing it was manipulation. The pain of seeing him with track marks on his arms from the needles nearly sent Kim and I into a complete tailspin. Our beautiful, amazing son was a full-blown heroin addict. Somehow, him taking pills seemed less serious. Then she says, so rather than call, Sean sent a painful Facebook message. Then 2 nights ago, I'm on Facebook, and Sean has posted a photo of himself. All of a sudden, over the past few weeks, he has computer access and is online regularly on Facebook. The photo sent me into a complete anxiety attack and shame attack. He looks like an AIDS patient. He has lost weight, his skin was gray, and he looked sad and desperate and tired. I cried myself to sleep. I showed Kim, and he stayed up all night, unable to sleep after looking at the photo. I cried for most of the next day before I went to bed. After seeing the photo, I wrote a comment to Sean under the photo. I love you, Sean. I miss you. And then I deactivated my Facebook account. One more. She was trying to help us, and we went on a getaway for my birthday, trying to find some way to find something to do. And she noted this: both of us are doing a lot of reading and working on ourselves rather than trying to control or fix Sean and Andrew. I'm watching a young man and his daughter, around 5 years old, play in the pool. I imagine one day having a little granddaughter or a grandson of my own. And she turned to me that day while we were sitting there by that pool, and she said, "Do you think that'll ever happen?" And I said, "I don't think so. I honestly don't even think they're going to live. And I think we better figure out how to learn to live with that." And so as I wrap this up, I just want you to understand this concept was really hard for me. Because I told the counselor, I don't have joy. And here's my words, I don't know where it went, because I used to. And he said, it never went anywhere. It's all in how you're looking at all of this. And I didn't like that answer, and I didn't understand that answer. And the reality was that I just didn't know where to go, because let me take you down memory lane, okay? This is as we close here. Ready? This is my family, all right? They look like future serious problem children, don't they? You can tell right now. Of course, even realizing that's me is hard to do. But anyway, here we go. See, we're getting older. See, they're getting worse. You can tell just by the photos, right? And this, yeah, it's definitely at that stage where you're sure this is the next step is what's going to happen. Well, the truth is, this is. Our older son up there, this is right before this all started. And the reality is this is what he ended up looking like when he finally went in for the, 20th time that he showed up in there. And our younger son, who was 6'3", when he finally went into a treatment program eventually, he weighed 137 pounds. And we thought they were going to die. And the real reality was that when we were at PAL, they told us, change that picture, stop thinking of that way, stop thinking of them as dying. Think of them as getting better. Think of them as in a suit going to work. And my wife and I, well, that's not true. And she's like, and they just said, well, why don't you just think that way instead of thinking the other way? Why do you want to believe the worst? So we tried. And that's our older son now. And this is almost 12 years later. And his younger brother followed along. The most important thing, and I say this and I mean this because I hate to say it, but the reality is here, that. And that beautiful little girl, who unfortunately was born with some heart issues, and she's had multiple surgeries and other things like that, doesn't matter. She's a ray of sunshine. And as she has grown up, she has made this redemptive work of what God has done in their lives just all the more unbelievable. And there's her little brother that just came along. So here's the thing. Back to those verses. He comforts us in all our troubles. Why? So that we can do this for others. This is what the 12th step is all about. This is what we are doing because we realize this is what's important. And so as I literally end right here, I want you to understand something about my granddaughter. Her favorite thing in the whole wide world is collecting shells. We've gone every year to the beach. This year, we went to Florida because we read online, because she's turning 10. We read online that the best shells are in Florida. So this is a picture in Florida, because if she wants to go somewhere, that's where we go. So we picked up all these shells, but let me take you back. We were, this is my last picture. So a few years ago, we were over in California. We were walking along and picking up shells, her and I. And I carry the bucket, she picks up the shells. So we were on this beach, and it was, you can't see it right here, but there was just, like that last one, there were thousands of shells, thousands of them. And we couldn't go 2 steps, and she's putting the shells in there. And I looked down, and I'm like, she's taking every little shard of a shell. They've all been crushed by people walking on them, right? And they're just little pieces, and she's just picking them all up. And I'm like, we're never going to get 10 feet. And so as we're walking along, she keeps putting them in there, and finally I stopped her, and her name is Nora. And I said, Nora, I said, sweetie, I said, maybe we ought to just pick, the ones that aren't broken, the special ones, so that we can take those back, because all these broken ones, they're just like, I don't know what we would do with them. She says, okay, Grandpa. We'll just pick the special ones. And I said, okay, great. So we walk about 2 more steps. She reaches down. She's picking up all the little ones. She just keeps picking them up. And I stop her and I go, sweetie, I thought we were going to just pick the special ones. She says, Grandpa, they're all special. They're all special. And those attitudes that I had have changed significantly. Broken people, all people, are special.
Amen.
And that's what I want to remember. So thank you all.